Right, welcome back. Our next couple of rounds, actually, we're going to be speaking to some people in other parts of the world beyond just Hong Kong and New York, who we've heard before. And our first speaker, which is why I've sat down in this chair, should be joining us now via live link, if technology is going to be our friend, which so far it isn't, so I'll tell you a bit about him. So Maxim Eristavi is a research fellow at the... Sorry? Oh, he is here. Hi, Maxim. Sorry, you're over there. You're behind me rather than in front of me. Welcome. Can you hear us?
Yes. Hi. Great pleasure joining you.
Thank you for joining us. Maxim, I was just introducing you to the room here in London and explained the concept of our lightning round interview we're going to have now. One of the points being thinking a bit beyond Europe, or rather Western Europe. Maxim describes himself on his Twitter profile as a bridge builder between Eastern Europe and the rest of the world. So perhaps we can start there. If you look at Eastern European region in general, sort of ballpark, are things getting better, worse, stagnant when it comes to LGBT rights?
Well, you know, sitting here in Georgia and Tbilisi, I actually feel like almost every day feels like historic, and we're definitely on the verge of massive breakthrough when it comes to civil rights equality, LGBT equality. And we've seen so many historic events in the span of just 5-6 years. The first ever violence-free massive pride events in Kiev, Ukraine, or Moldova. And even here in Tbilisi, the recent uprising, massive uprising against police brutality, were spotted by a lot of LGBT flags. So this kind of agenda is definitely on top. And what we're seeing along the process of the whole region reclaiming this identity, European identity that was once stolen by communist Russia, the issue of equality and LGBT equality is definitely prominent. And, you know, it's remarkable to see those changes.
So does that, just to push you a little bit, does that mean that in all of the countries in the region that you particularly cover, things have got better on the whole for LGBT people?
Of course, they got better, but also, you know, we got to be realistic and take a bigger perspective. When we compare to the progress that our friends enjoy in the West, obviously the road is way, way, way long to get to there. So, for example, like not a single country provides adequate protection from violence. There are no hate crime laws or hate speech laws in Ukraine, a country of 45 million. It actually creates a lot of atmosphere of fear. For example, there are not a lot of openly gay people like me in Ukraine. I know like maybe 3 dozen in, again, a country 45 million. And this is a huge problem. And also, that's not similar story of progress that the West had, for example. The West didn't face international homophobic groups, you know, actually pouring immense resources to the region and trying to establish, as they call it, safe havens for traditional family values.
I'm definitely going to get back to the trans-border homophobic organisations in a second, because I know you've got a lot to say on that. I just wanted to first ask you, and I will also invite the audience for a few questions in a second, but you've worked quite a lot with foreign investors in terms of getting LGBT rights progress on the agenda, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about the response you've had so far, and perhaps also any thoughts on how a well-intending foreign investor can have an impact in the region?
Oh, definitely. That's the most exciting thing that I'm, you know, occupied now. So I've been, you know, I've been building bridges and traveling around, and I always meet so many exciting, inspiring people in the private sector, in the UK, in Europe, in the States, and they all keep talking about social responsibility and how they actually do terrific job in promoting values that actually cater to equality within their companies. And then I go back to the region. I see the same offices in Eastern Europe of, you know, big IT companies or finance sector, but there's nothing happening in there. And it's important for Eastern Europe because foreign investments is not only booming market, it's also a specific culture where a lot of people here respect and value foreign companies more than they, for example, value their own government. Therefore, there's a massive opportunity for foreign investors to create safe zones and safe space. You can do it even non-publicly within your branch offices in the region, so you can actually follow the talk and be part of the historic change in the region, and also do not have this gap between the stuff, the work you do for equality at your headquarters and branch offices.
You fell away a little bit there. I don't know, that might be at our end. Could you just repeat that last point very briefly, just the last few lines?
Yeah, that you can actually do and deliver some change and create safe spaces at your regional branches, and maybe not even publicly, and fill the gap that you have between work that you do for equality at your headquarters and then the lack of it when it comes to regional offices. There is a terrific opportunity to do it, at least in Eastern Europe at the moment.
Before I open it up to the room, when I asked you in our exchange before this, what do you want to talk about? You mentioned trans-border homophobic organizations, and I must confess I had to read that sort of 3 times to think about what are trans-border homophobic organizations, and once you explain it, I was shocked actually at the scale and the existence. Can you just talk us through a little bit what trans-border homophobic organizations are, but particularly what role they are playing in the region, what sort of scale are we talking, and what's the response to this?
Well, it is indeed a shocking issue that I'm surprised that not so many people talk about it in the West. So, for example, we talk about very influential, powerful, wealthy, conservative groups, both religious and politically conservative, that probably lost in many or all battles in the West when it comes to equality, women's rights, LGBT rights. But now they want to make sure that they don't lose those battles in the developing world or emerging countries. So therefore, they pour enormous intellectual, financial, and political investments to those developing countries, Russia, Ukraine, but also Uganda, Latin America. Make sure that the messages of homophobia are repackaged, reinforced, and then exported to those countries so they can actually win some ground there and create, as you said, safe havens for homophobia there. So maybe with time, they can come back at home and strike again, reinforced by the activity in the developed world.
But in practice, what does this mean? Does this mean reprinting flyers, propaganda? What in practice are they doing? How are you noticing this influence on the ground?
Well, first of all, I've been following civil rights movement and LGBT movements in the West, with interest and learning history. And then, I remember all the messages, all the slogans, like, for example, that, all gay people are pedophiles and so on and so on. Those very effective propaganda messages that I heard 10, 15 years ago in the West. Now they're repackaged and, exported to countries like Georgia and Ukraine, where suddenly homophobic leaders receive this propaganda pamphlets or, so-called science works that are supposed to prove that sexuality is a choice. And then there are languages widely offered to local homophobic groups, and they use it. I have an example in Russia where religious Protestant religious group reach out to Orthodox, which usually they're.
I'm sorry. It's probably us. Is there a mic you could speak closer to, or is this us? Sorry, keep going.
Maybe it's.
Use sign language as well. Go
on. So there are a number of examples how those conservative groups work on the ground with people, exporting messages through financing literature, through financing organizations like World Family Congress, which, this networking massive event that happens every year to connect all those hate groups together so they exchange information between each other.
I'd love to keep asking you questions, but that's unfair to the audience. Let's open it up to the audience. Are there any questions here for Maxim about either his work in Ukraine or broader in Eastern Europe? Stunned in silence. Well, then I'll just keep going. If anybody does come up with a question, please do raise your hand. Maxim, so Do you, just a last question on these trans-border homophobic organizations, do you have a sense of where the money is coming from, and is there a pushback beyond people like yourself?
Well, that's what I kind of recruit people for in the West. So I tell you that those organizations, like for example, World Family Congress, are Western-based, and usually, for example, the latter is based in the U.S. So their finances, their political activity, their human resources are all in the Western countries. So why don't we get the same kind of a feed of pushback by our allies in the West, who can expose them, shame them, and actually bring that issue to the mainstream media coverage as well? And it's important to do, because unless you finish that fight in the West, we cannot finish ours when it comes to developing countries.
Fair enough. So we've spoken about foreign investors. What about the other way around? How much are local companies or local investors now starting to engage with these issues?
Well, they do. I mean, at least in countries like Ukraine, where business is more friendly towards LGBT messaging, or at least they're more open to discuss those things. Fortunately, the situation is worse in Georgia. But unfortunately, I mean, the situation is still bad. Like, for example, with my personal experience, I started working as a journalist in local newsroom when I was 17. So unfortunately, I also faced a situation where my superior, the manager, forcibly outed me to my newsroom colleagues. And I didn't have any instruments to fight back, or to pursue any kind of legal protection or force any kind of justice responsibility on my workforce. But it changed actually when I started working for international newsroom in Ukraine. And this is the first time for me as a young professional, as a young gay professional, that I felt safe. And I think that was one of the reasons why I started being more encouraged to speak out, including from my personal experience, because I felt safe. And sometimes we don't underestimate the power of safe zone that our workplaces can provide. But this is very important. And unfortunately, we don't see that much happening within foreign headquarters in Eastern Europe, or for that matter, in many developing countries.
If you could, there's a lot of people in this room who work in big businesses and multinationals. For those who might be in your region or thinking of coming to your region with their businesses, if you could leave them one message, one action to take on board beyond just coming to the business and making a profit, what would it be related to this topic?
Well, I think that it's important for you to reach out to us directly, those who try to afflict change on the ground, because your local branches will never advise you to go for social responsibility programs, for LGBT equality programs in what they call risky market. In my experience, local branches are also filled with homophobic people who, don't like this narrative much, or cannot, actually misguide you on the risk assessment. Cooperate with civil society, cooperate with journalists, reach out to the real information, and then yourself, you can make this decision whether it's risky for you to invest in equality within your branch or not.
That's a very good one to take away. We've got a few more minutes. I still don't see any hands, so I noted the word Russia earlier. You mentioned, sorry, you can't talk about Eastern Europe and not talk about Russia. You mentioned Russia earlier, but actually not in the way that I was expecting you to. I think you mentioned it as a recipient of homophobic propaganda. Maybe I misheard you there, but I wonder the other way around, in how far is Russia, I'm going to be careful with my phrasing here, but is Russia one of the countries you still worry about in terms of the influence on the region counter to progress on LGBT rights?
Oh, I won't be careful, because as half Ukrainian, half Georgian, both my countries are invaded by Russia at the moment. So I'm really passionate about this issue. And I can testify that actually Russia made hate, and specifically LGBT hate, a part of their expansion part of their foreign policy, which was later picked up by a lot of political groups in the region as something that they can do. Before Russia started doing LGBT propaganda or hate propaganda, part of their foreign policy, many political elites here didn't even kind of imagine that it could be a powerful foreign policy or local politics too. So I think that's important to keep that in mind, and also to think about it not only as a local issue that every country goes through issues related to LGBT or civil rights equality. This has been internationalized in such a way that now it's used even in foreign policy, in security policies, and so on and so on. So I don't think we can look at this issue as local line or progress issue anymore. It has become globalized, and that's part of the problem why it's so hard to fight against it for us, and was easier for you because you didn't face it at that time.
That's a very fair and sobering point to end on. But to end on a slightly happier one than the problems with Russia, I'm sorry to have raised that in the last 2 minutes. In sort of 20, 30 seconds, what is your, what do you hope in 5 years' time will have changed, either specifically to Ukraine or just more broadly in the Eastern European region on LGBT rights?
Well, the change is already underway, and it's really related to those countries coming back and rejoining the European family. So I don't think it's reversible at this time or stoppable. But I'm really concerned that with proliferation of identity politics everywhere, it will become much harder to achieve progress through political means. Therefore, I'm more encouraged and optimistic about trying to bring some change and lend some change through private sector and through businesses who have now more opportunities to unfortunately deliver some change when it comes to LGBT equality than our governments have.
Thank you very much, Maxim, for joining us. I'm sure everybody here very much enjoyed that.
Pleasure.
I will leave you in the capable hands of my colleague, Helen Joyce.